History is full of absolutely insane warriors. We're talking kings, emperors, and generals who led gigantic armies and built massive empires. But what if I told you one of the most legendary commanders in history wasn't a king or a general or even a man? What if she was a 17-year-old girl? At 17, she was a peasant from a village you've never heard of, and she probably couldn't even read or write. But she took command of the entire French army, broke the will of an invading superpower, and literally turned the tide of a war that had been going on for 100 years. So how did a teenager with zero military training convince a desperate prince to give her control of his entire kingdom? This is the insane story of the leadership and unbreakable faith of Joan of Arc. To really get how crazy Joan's story is, you have to understand the world she was born into. The year is 1429, and France is getting completely destroyed. For almost 100 years, the 100 Years' War has been ripping the country apart. The English and their buddies, the Burgundians, control all of northern France, including Paris. The French king is dead. His son, the Dauphin Charles, is basically in hiding, and nobody thinks he can be king. France was broken, demoralized, and on the verge of total collapse. And in the middle of all this chaos, a new voice appears, not from some royal palace, but from a small farm in the tiny village of Domremy. Joan was born a peasant, and her life was supposed to be quiet. She didn't learn to read from a tutor. She learned about faith from her mom. But when she was 13, her life took a turn no one could have seen coming. She started seeing blinding lights and hearing voices, voices she believed were Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. At first, she was terrified, but their message became crystal clear, and it was a mission that was almost impossible to believe. She, a teenage girl, was chosen by God to save France. She had to drive out the English and get the Dauphin crowned as the one true king. Just think about how insane that sounds. In a world where women had zero power in war or politics, Joan's divine mission meant she had to break every single rule of her time. It seemed impossible, maybe even a crime. But to Joan, it was the absolute truth. Having a vision from God is one thing, convincing the entire world is something else. At 16, Joan started her quest. She went to the fortress of Vaucouleurs and begged the commander, Robert de Baudricourt, for an escort to see the Dauphin. He literally laughed in her face, called her a fool, and sent her home. But Joan was relentless. She stayed for months, and her insane level of confidence started to win people over. Her timing was also perfect. Right when news came in of another crushing French defeat, the Battle of the Herrings, Joan's predictions suddenly seemed way more believable. Worn down by her pure persistence, and maybe even believing an old prophecy about a maid from Lorraine who would save France, Baudricourt finally caved. He gave her an escort of 6 soldiers. For her own safety on the insane 11-day trip through enemy territory, she cut her hair short and wore men's clothes. Her arrival at the royal court in Chinon was a total spectacle. The Dauphin Charles was, obviously, skeptical. So he set up a test. He disguised himself in his own crowd of courtiers. But legend says that Joan, who had never seen him before, walked straight through the crowd and pointed him out instantly. Then, in a private meeting that is still a mystery today, she told him a secret, something only he and God could ever know. Whatever she said, it worked. People who were there said Charles walked out of that meeting looking radiant. Going against all of his advisors, he gave her exactly what she asked for. A peasant girl, barely 17 years old, was given command of an entire army. Joan got her own custom armor, a horse and a white banner with a picture of Jesus on it. She was sent to the city of Orleans, a super important city that had been under a brutal English siege for over 200 days. Everyone thought the city was going to fall and that the rest of France would be next. French morale was at rock bottom. The old-school French commanders had no idea what to think of her. To them, she was just a mascot, some kind of mystic, not a real commander. They were not ready for what happened next. Joan immediately threw out their careful defensive plans. She had one simple, non-negotiable demand: attack. Her leadership was like nothing they had ever seen. She led every charge from the very front, holding her banner high, a living symbol of God's power. She took a completely defeated army and made them believe they could actually win, and her faith and courage spread like wildfire. But it wasn't just hype. Joan had an unbelievable natural talent for battle. She wasn't a trained tactician, but she pushed for aggressive, lightning-fast attacks while other commanders were hesitating. Her whole strategy was to get her troops fired up and lead a direct all-out assault. At the fortress of Saint-Lô, the French commanders were about to call off a failed attack when Joan rode up, rallied the soldiers who were running away, and personally led them to a massive victory. The huge turning point came at the main English fortress, Les Tourelles. In the middle of the battle, Joan was hit by an arrow that went right through her shoulder. The wound was serious, and her men started to retreat, thinking she was dead. But Joan just pulled the arrow out herself, had the wound dressed with some oil, and got right back in the fight. Seeing her back on her feet, holding her banner, was like an electric shock to the French soldiers. They launched one last furious attack and completely wiped out the English defenders, taking the fortress. Just 9 days after she showed up, the English completely gave up the siege. Orleans was free. It was a victory that completely shattered the idea that the English were invincible and turned the tide of the entire war. The victory at Orleans was just the beginning. Joan told them they had to push their advantage, now. She led the army on the insane Loire campaign, a series of lightning-fast victories that cleared the road to Reims, the holy city where French kings were crowned. Cities that had been under English control for a decade just gave up, sometimes without even fighting, the second they saw her army coming. On July 17, 1429, with Joan standing right next to him, the Dauphin was finally crowned King Charles VII. Her main mission was complete, but her fame and popularity made some very powerful people at court extremely nervous. Advisors like Georges de la Trémoille started whispering to the king that Joan was getting too powerful. The king, now safe on his throne, started getting scared. He chose slow political deals over Joan's aggressive attacks. An assault on Paris failed, partly because the king waited too long to send help. All that divine momentum was being killed by petty politics. In the spring of 1430, Joan rode to defend the city of Compiègne. During a small fight outside the walls, she was thrown off her horse. The city gates slammed shut behind her, and she was captured by Burgundian soldiers. She was the most valuable prisoner in all of France, but the king she had put on the throne, Charles VII, did absolutely nothing. He didn't try to pay her ransom or rescue her. It was like she had served her purpose and was now disposable. The English, who were desperate to get revenge and to delegitimize the king she crowned, paid the Burgundians 10,000 livres for her. The English couldn't just execute Joan for beating them. They had to destroy her entire legacy. So they put her on trial for heresy, witchcraft, and for the crime of wearing men's clothes. The trial, held in the English-controlled city of Rouen, was a complete sham from the start, run by a pro-English bishop named Pierre Cochon. For months they grilled her. A whole panel of experts tried to trap her with complicated theological questions. They were expecting a scared, uneducated peasant girl. What they got was a young woman with unbelievable courage and a lightning-fast mind. The trial transcripts, which we thankfully still have, show her brilliant, defiant spirit. They tried to trap her by asking if she knew she was in God's grace. A classic trick question, since saying yes was a sin of pride and no was an admission of guilt. But she gave one of the most famous replies in history. "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me." She was kept in a military prison with male guards, not in a church prison with nuns, which was her right. Witnesses later said she kept her male clothes on because it was her only protection from being assaulted. Even facing death, she never lost her faith. The verdict was already decided. She was found guilty. On May 30th, 1431, 19-year-old Joan of Arc was taken to the marketplace in Rouen. As they tied her to a huge stake, she begged for a cross. An English soldier, feeling pity, quickly tied 2 sticks together and gave it to her. Hardened soldiers and English officials were seen openly weeping as the fire grew. Her own executioner would later say he greatly feared to be damned because he had burned a holy woman. Joan's story is the ultimate proof of how one person's courage can literally change the world. If you think stories about legendary figures like Joan are as incredible as we do, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. You are not going to want to miss our next deep dives into the most insane people in history, and let us know in the comments which historical figure we should do next. Joan's death was not the end of her story, it was just the beginning. Her martyrdom lit a new fire in the French people, creating a national identity and a will to fight back. The war continued for another 22 years, but the tide she had turned never turned back. The French, using the same bold, aggressive tactics she pioneered, would go on to win the 100 Years' War. Decades after she was executed, King Charles VII ordered a new trial. The old verdict was completely thrown out, her name was cleared, and she was officially declared a martyr. Then, centuries later, in 1920, the Catholic Church named her a saint. Today, she is a patron saint of France and a global icon of faith, defiance, and courage. Her legacy is bigger than just her battles. It's a story that has inspired movies, books, and countless people to challenge the limits society puts on them. She was a peasant who became a commander, a warrior who became a martyr, and a teenage girl who became an absolute legend. Her story is a timeless reminder that the craziest courage can come from the most unlikely people, and that a single voice with an unbreakable belief can actually rally a nation.